IVM.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hi everyone, I'm Sarthak and I welcome you to one more episode of All Things Policy. In today's episode, we are going to talk about the animation, visual effects, gaming and comics industry, the AVGC industry. The AVGC industry has the potential to grow just like the IT industry did 2 decades back. But for this to happen, we need to have the right kind of ecosystem. Some states in India have already been at the forefront and they have initiated AVGC specific policies. But there is scope for more. In today's episode, we have a guest who is an industry veteran, Mr. Biren Ghose. Biren Ghose is the country head for India for Technicolor. He has established India as the primary hub for Technicolor's foray in the CG animation business and as a major center for its global expertise in VFX. Prior to this, he has served as CEO at UTV, Executive Director at Eros International Films, CEO of Kahani World Inc. Canada. Recently, he received the National Order of Merit, a knighthood status conferred on him by the French government. Hi, Biren. Welcome to All Things Policy.
Hi, and a pleasure to be here today. Thank you so much.
The pleasure is mine as well. So, Biren, as I start, I just want to ask you a basic question. Two basic questions. First is, why is animation, visual effects, gaming, and comics, they're clubbed together? Why they're clubbed together as AVGC? And what is the common link between them? And secondly, why should the governments, union governments, state governments, be interested in this sector?
So thank you very much. Sometimes, the actions that we take, we reflect on them later on. And being on this podcast platform will make me think about the things that we've been doing for many years. So it's a wonderful opportunity. The word policy itself has an officious and ominous ring to it, right? Many of us, we grew up believing that policies were these strictures, almost like a religious book made by government, made by bureaucrats, and these were to be rigidly implemented with the aim of creating prosperity for all of us. And in my younger days, India had this famous or infamous 5-year planning cycle that used to guide all the directions and inform fiscal budgets, and the emphasis was sometimes on agriculture and sometimes on industry. And when I took my first job, which was many years ago, I'm embarrassed to say, the same syndrome was prevalent in our companies also. And whether it was corporate strategic plans, whether it was application for loans to banks, whether it was prospectus for public issue of shares, guess what they all asked for? 5-year plans. And if we fast forward today, a 5-year planning cycle seems a near impossibility. And anything, even the year 3 of a 3-year forecast seems riddled with so much uncertainty that at best it is an educated hypothesis. So, given the pace of change today, most of the attention revolves around fiscal policies as all countries and all economies aim to pursue economic growth and manage these price levels and attempt to steer inflation in ways that keeps the economy on an even keel. And India is among those countries that needs policy both for channeling pro-public services as also to enable growth, which will help industry and all of us as citizens to kind of embrace development and get the benefits of that whole story. And therefore, I would say that policy, if I was to put it in a modern day language, must act as a kind of GPS type system to get us to the destination we want to go to. Now, to your question about animation and the AVGC story, I'd like to first start by telling you that the media and entertainment economy is a driver of both economic as well as emotional prosperity in all countries. And in the more developed countries, they have found several ways to stimulate better conditions to help the creative community. Because these folks achieve this dual goal of making people affluent and also of making them happy concurrently. And this is facilitated through a very intelligent policy framework. Animation, visual effects, games, these are sectors that are just forms of filmmaking, forms of making imagery in the audiovisual world. So every movie, whether you know it or not, has a certain amount of visual effects and a certain amount of animation. Uh, Podcasters don't know this, but if you were in a visual medium and you were actually just changing your PowerPoint slides, that's also animation, right? So what we have thought of is that, look, 15 years back, the bringing animation type technologies into our image making process used to be 1 or 2 or 3% of our business. In the last few years, it's already crossed 10 to 12%, and in the next 3 to 4 years, it will double. So it is intrinsically part of this, and then therefore I would request you to indulge me in just giving you the examples of countries like the UK, where in India we have many disparate sectors and ministries that look at how the creative sector should be cradled and nurtured. In those places, they actually have everything under one umbrella. So whether it is broadcasting or TV or new media or even sports, it's the same ministry. And therefore, they are also able to look at it right from the education, going on to production, going on to the management of content, to the distribution. There's a whole value chain that gets created in which AVGC is just a part of that entire spectrum. And to answer your question, how did these get clubbed? I think over time, these were sunrise sectors. And it's quite a mouthful to say, animation itself is a four-syllable word, right? So AVGC became simpler. I think it was in confabulations with the Karnataka government when we were trying to create the first policy about 12, 13 years back, that this acronym got invented. It's like BRB today is be right back. Why is it there? Because it's simpler to say on a Zoom call or on a text message. So I think it's pretty much that. It became. I wish it was an emoticon instead, but no, it's just AVGC.
So, Biren, at present, if you look at the AVGC sector in India, right? So, what is its contribution in terms of jobs to the GDP, to the export?
Yeah, you know, most people on this podcast and people who are our friends, people who are our neighbors, they will believe that India is the world's largest country when it comes to producing feature films. Because all the stars are known to us, the directors are known to us, the songs are known to us, and it would be no surprise if we said it was the largest business that we have in the country. But they will be surprised to learn that the revenues from film are less than 7 or 8% of the total media and entertainment sector in India and have been so for many, many years. And if you take broadcasting or the TV and even the digital content that you see today on your screen at home, that would be more than 53 or 55%. And separately, if we were to add up, what does the aggregate of online gaming, visual effects, uh, animation all contribute in the same way, you would find that this would be a sector that has somewhere over 11 or 10, 11 or 12% of the total pie, but is growing at an exponential rate of more than 25, 35, in some sectors, even 40% year on year, because it's a smaller base, but everything that is digital is kind of growing at that rate. And that's where the policy imperative becomes important. I mentioned to you that the first AVGC policy came out in Karnataka just over 10 years ago. We've had a second policy in between, and we are right now in the process of looking at the 3.0 version of this policy. And it was difficult at that time to explain why we needed a standalone policy, and we had to predicate that argument on the strength of the opportunity that lies there, right? And I think that's what this conversation is really about. I think it's how do you deliver on an opportunity. How do you develop those insights? How do you act responsibly, working jointly together? How do you get all hands on the deck between government and industry and academia? And I think that's where we were fortunate in being able to convince the cabinet that this policy should have come about, and it has delivered amazing results. It has planted the seeds in about 27 government colleges just in our first pilot over the last 7 or 8 years, where people today across India are undergrads in the various bachelors for fine arts programs and BVOC for many of the specific areas within AVGC, and they go through those 4 years without ever having touched a digital tool. And when they graduate, there are no jobs that don't expect them to touch and work on digital tools. And that paradigm is very different. And so this policy kind of helped to open doors for grants to be given. I think we've on the government digital arts program, we've given out more than 4 crores in buckets of 3 and 5 and 7 lakhs to different colleges where we created labs, trained trainers, and have now got hundreds of graduates who are eminently better placed to get a job in companies than they would have if they had not had this facility. And it's not part of curriculum. There's no examination, but I think it's such a big value add to a youngster coming and looking into the job market. And the policy also helped in helping people to take the first baby steps in terms of market access. We funded many delegations that went off to international markets, which on its own for an individual is a really expensive proposition to travel abroad and pay the entrance fee, which is usually in about $1,000 just to get access to those markets to enter them. And this has given rise to the birth of how people can come up with intellectual property, to come up with their own ideas, to try and go to the market with their own shows. And this is where the policy kind of helps to create the opportunity to get people to rally around it and to work forward. And some of the tailwinds in this conversation are that we've been able to attract other. I think you mentioned in your introduction that we took this user case to Telangana. I was fortunate to be invited to call the industry together and help them craft their policy, which now is more than a few years old, with a big emphasis on gaming, and shortly also on esports. And then I think we've got now Kerala, Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, Punjab, West Bengal, Tamil Nadu, amongst others, that are in an advanced stage of trying to see how this should take place. And we are suggesting that at the state level, maybe they can have accents on different aspects of the policy that can be complementary to each other to create almost like a string of pearls. And we have also made a recommendation too and got an in principle verbal approval in my disposition as the chairman of the national AVGC committee for CII. We've got the information broadcasting ministry to say that yes, they will look at and try and bring out an AVGC policy for the country, which would be fantastic. So that's where we are, I think, in that progression.
Yeah. Thanks, Biren, for letting us know what should a policy do in this AVGC sector. Now, I had a couple of questions here around some of the things that you mentioned. The first thing, so you mentioned that there are some states which have already ventured into this sector. They have already started drafting policies, and Karnataka is one of the example of those states. It had a policy for 2012 2017, and now they have a policy for 2007 2022. Now, but not all states have taken it up. Karnataka, Maharashtra, Telangana, these are some states which have been at the forefront. So I was wondering, is this something which is organic, or is there anything specific which prevents other states from drafting these policies? Do they need some specific backward linkages?
It's a good question. You see, what happens is that it depends where. I mentioned to you earlier in our conversation that we have many different, if you like, we have many different triggers that come from different parts of the country. In some places, they are looking at this as a way to stimulate the startup ecosystem. In some places, they're looking at this more from the development of skills. Policies tend to make this much more holistic. And I think one of the things that we have really understood, I have really understood, and I believe is is a very strong reason for us to propagate this in all states, is that these policies help to strengthen the communities that actually give opportunity in the tier 2 and tier 3 cities. Of the 27 art colleges that we enabled with the AVGC policy in Karnataka, we actually had only one of them in Bangalore, and the others were all in much smaller towns. And we find that the opportunity to bring a lot of people into the system, from even the lower economic strata, is a very very remarkable story, which has given rise to the fact that in our conversations, and I've been part of that from before it was declared, we have made the audiovisual sector, especially in the areas that we are talking about today, one of the champion sectors. In the Ministry of Commerce and Industries identified this as one of the 12 champion sectors where there can be exponential growth if the right amount of enablement and focus is provided. And so I think uh, that's what I really think is the power of a policy, is to be able to shine a light on what we can do to act responsibly and collectively to make something an outcome.
Exactly. And you also mentioned about market access, right? So at present, the AVGC firms that are based in India, many of them are actually working for clients who are based outside India, right? A lot of these revenue is for foreign clients. Now, I was wondering, is there any hindrance right now which prevents linkages with global supply chains?
Well, I think there are many things that make up a single frame of animation. It may not be easily understood to a layman that when you create a single frame of animation, you have at least 12 to 14 different skill sets and processes that have gone on to create that single frame. And if I was to put it in layman's terms, some are akin to sculpting, some are akin to painting, some are akin to acting, some are akin to a combination of maybe anatomy and math, like creating a rig, right, for how an animal walks, right? Some are akin to photography or lighting, and some are just using technology like heavy computing power to render the final image. If I was to send you a 4K image from my phone, it will take you, even with the high bandwidth today, a few seconds to open that one frame and on your WhatsApp, right? Imagine that we have 32 uncompressed images per second when we work on feature films, and we are doing that in animation. So you can imagine that this is, besides the artist and the technician and the person who is working on the details of each frame, but there is a heavy requirement for infrastructure. Now, this is a key element for policy, because if we were to create, and by the way, we've done that in Karnataka with the AVGC policy, we have created a center of excellence so that we can put in into a single location, which is there in Whitefield in Bangalore, in Bengaluru. We have created a center where we have the world's most advanced motion capture. We have the world's most for facial and for body scanning, and effectively, we today, I think it doesn't exist in Asia, are able to provide an individual person. If you decided that you wanted to make a project, you would be going there and using equipment that has already cost more than 10 crores to just establish. So we managed to get a grant of 48 crores in order for us to put that center up. With COVID, it has gone a little bit slower, and we are at the halfway mark. But that shows that you need to give confidence to authorities in order for them to take these leaps of faith, without which you cannot leapfrog business in other countries. Your point about the fact that we do a significant amount of our AVGC work for international clients comes from the fact that they have a robust mechanism where creative technology, production, storage, delivery is all in place on a consumer base and a production base that understands it. So 70% roughly of our total AVGC revenues in India come from the global market, from servicing, world majors who have studios or game publishers, as the case might be. And yet, I don't think we are more than 1 or 1.5% of the world market. So while we talk about developing our own IP and developing our own country and the revenues and the adoption of and the success of animation and visual effects and games in our country, which is growing exponentially on a low base, but the opportunity for us to make a lot of money that will help us enable our own growth in India is coming from the global market, and I think that's a very very significant opportunity that all of us are keen to advance.
Yeah, so this is something which was interesting. I mean, given that infrastructure in India as such is not up to the mark, and again, for a nascent sector like AVGC, it might not be. I was also thinking of not only the physical infrastructure, this sector also needs some other kind of infrastructure. I was reading that in case of India, like not just India, in case of gaming sector, a lot of the games are transaction based games, right? So for that, the users, players have to pay some fees to play. So physical infrastructure is required, but on top of that, you need to have the right kind of digital payment system. All those things also have to go hand in hand. And when it comes to physical infrastructure, here also I came across some articles that esports is going to be something which is the next thing. So in the gaming sector, esports is going to create a lot of opportunities, avenues. But for that also, you need to have special arenas, right, where people can come and watch these performances, watch these competitions. So those infrastructure are also equally relevant, I guess, and we don't have much at present.
Yeah, yeah. You know, there is a humorous saying when I go and meet people from the creative community abroad. They say,
Yeah.
we know that you have many gods and goddesses in India, but the ones that are talked about socially, openly, and without controversy, there
Yeah.
are food, cricket, and Bollywood, right? so,
Yeah.
so, so when it comes to the esports question that you asked, right?
Yes.
It is merging those two things, which is content, right? Entertainment content, as well as things like cricket, and of course, as you know, in more recent times, other games, uh, thanks to media, become huge. Take our one of our national games, kabaddi, and look at it 10 years back and see what happened once it became a league and became partly owned by one of
Exactly.
the larger broadcasters in the country. It has transformed the way in which it is played, rewarded, consumed, and so on and so forth, right? So that's what happens in the case of it. In Japan and Korea, this esports phenomenon is huge. It is no longer a new story. And an average player, an average competitor in Korea, according to data, can possibly earn $80,000 a year on winnings.
Oh,
I'm talking about the average.
yes.
At the peak, there are numbers like $4.5 million.
Wow.
Now, what happens here is you create a parallel system. So, in our company, we worked on for our client, Electronic Arts. We've been making the FIFA game now for 12 or 13 years. We do all the art and the animation. We know all the players, their faces, their hairstyles, their costumes, the stadiums, and so on and so forth. This is all done in computer graphics here. But you know the power of those games. And those games create an alternate reality. And so I might like to just tell you that one of the things about the AVGC sector is that if you stop for a moment to think about it as entertainment, it is doing two things, right? It is improving the power of simulation. A Formula One driver drives with on the Formula One simulator long before he's given a car that costs $100 million or $50 million, right? So
Yeah.
effectively, today when I go around, Whitefield where I work, and you go to the Mercedes-Benz Research Center or go to the Dassault Aviation Center where they do lots of things for the Airbus, their studios are just like our studios. So while we do things for entertainment, these same tools and technologies are now becoming ubiquitous to all industries. And imagery and storytelling is a part of every single industry, whether you make biscuits for kids or whether you make cars for adults, right? It's how it is.
And also edutech, real estate, all of them are trying to give you a different kind of experience, and they're using VFX, animation, and all these things.
So I wanted to, yes, you're right. I wanted to acknowledge the question that you asked, that esports is lot of media is one to one. A lot of one media is one to many. A lot of media like multiplayer games is many to many. But esports is bigger than all of that, because esports is literally like creating another world in which somebody is broadcasting, somebody is playing, somebody is watching, somebody is selling you virtual food or virtual clothes or virtual props or virtual, if it's soccer, it could be you're buying a football. You could be playing with the players. And look, even though it's early stage in our country, this is a business that is of high appeal. In the online game space and the esports space today, there are, without exaggeration, hundreds of millions of dollars of top flight venture money that has come in to back people that they believe will be credible and successful. And these are companies that are highly compliant, and the same people that might back an EV vehicle or anything, or drones or anything else that is tomorrow's technology. So I think it's really important here for us to play again a role where, coming back to my definition of policies, are ways by which we can ideate and deliver on our purpose. And here's an opportunity, and there will be esports policies. I've been in a webinar with the government of Telangana that has talked about an imminent esports policy. The sports minister of our country has gone on the floor of parliament to say that he will create an esports body. So I think it's not just a conversation. It is something that is being discussed and ideated at the highest echelons of policy making.
So since we are talking about policies and different kind of initiatives that are being considered now, so I just want to ask you one question here. So you have right now you have mentioned about the fact that we have to focus on infrastructure, market access, capital, skill development. Now, what do you think, or how do you think will be the policies for this? How will be a policy for AVGC sector? How will the policy ensure all these things, market access, capital, skill development? And who all will be enabling this?
Right. So policies at the end of the day are digital calling cards. Okay, what happens when you have a policy is that you can go back to individual nodal agencies within the government. You can go to investors, you can go to existing companies, and you can actually construct business proposals and ideas and models where you collaborate between education and industry, between education and government, or industry and government, in ways that kind of give you, referring to my GPS analogy, a way for you to plot a new route to go from your idea to a proof of concept in order to come out with a business proposition. And I think it also serves to as a clarion call for a global connect. So when we meet up with the trade commissioners of international countries that are based in India, and we have sessions with them, and we say, hey, this is what the policy of the government is going to enable, they make sure that the delegations that they bring down or invite in the future will know that India is open for this kind of business, and it brings those kinds of folks to come either on specific trips just for that sector, or as part of larger delegations. And that's how business has been done for many years and continues to be done even in a virtual mode. And I think the important thing is that the way forward is really about getting more people to come around the table and articulate views. We have you talked about games in the previous few minutes that we were chatting, and there's a very great need for clarity right now, because there are some states in India which have already put some ban on games. Others are figuring it out, and so I've been, many of us have been on many forums where you have a number of constituents. There are people from the home ministries in those states. There are people from the technology ministry in those states. There are people from the police or the CID in those states. There are industry folks, obviously. There are investors in that. There are even lawyers in that, right? Retired Supreme Court judges and others. And what are they trying to do? They are trying to figure out, hey, where are the guardrails to be put, right? What is the game of chance? What is the game of skill? What is gambling? How do we segregate between one and the other? And while it is not rocket science, it is still new. And when anything new comes up, there is caution, because let's not forget it that media has always tried to be careful about the rights of citizens, and that's where I think you're going to see not just an AVGC policy, but there will be policies for even elements within that, right? There will be bills that will be tabled on things like online gaming, on esports, on anything that people are supposed to participate in, and where money gets spent in the same way as many of our conventional industries. Because besides COVID, I mean, there is nothing that's free, and I know that we start a lot of businesses in social media that start off with in the freemium space, but then need to find subscription in order to grow. And I can just tell you, when you talk of television, if I go back 20 years, it was a 85%, 90% advertising driven business, and subscription was almost not possible. We still probably have one of the lowest subscription rates for a television connection in our home compared to almost any part of the world. But that has changed, because today you have more than 55, I don't know the right number, 55 or 60% of the business is subscription based. And as you see the streaming channels come on board, it is totally subscription based. So I think games, like all other forms of media in the future, will not be dependent only on advertising, and will need to be charging the consumer for what is, I think, a legitimate form of entertainment. And I think that's a policy conundrum as well as we go forward.
So yeah, just like you mentioned right now, that we are having different kind of laws related to gaming, and this is something which needs to be streamlined. And recently, this legal case is going on whether Ludo is a case of whether Ludo requires skills, or it is just a game of chance. Now, apart from that, I was wondering what kind of tools should the government be using when it is drafting a policy. What all tools should be there? Should it include some incentive? Should it include some grants? Should it have some policy related to taxation? What all tools can there be within this policy framework?
I think it's important to calibrate this discussion depending on when we are having it. We are having this in June of 2021. In June of 2021, to think that the entertainment economy will be fueled by government grants at a time when the government is having to prioritize health and safety, and potentially cannot spend as much money as they need to, because the size of our country and its population is so large, will have a very different texture to that conversation than if we were having it, say, 6 or 7 years ago, when the you know when we were on a very different trajectory as a country, and looking at the very different growth rate, right? So I think it depends on that, but I think it needs to have a combination of many things. I think it needs to focus on using available grants, right? There are grants, plenty of money is available for education. And you spoke about the ed tech revolution that we are seeing in front of us, and there's no reason why the ed tech revolution cannot be both fueled by and contribute to the AVGC sector, right? I'm broadening AVGC for a moment to include AR, VR, and the new media tools that all of us use in all of us produce in animation and visual effects too. I think the we are forgetting something that is really important, and we've had this conversation for many years. And yes, we've been successful in getting AVGC policies issued, but if you look at civilization, right? I'm trying not to be too heavy for a moment. The culture, if you look at the culture of any place, take India. The culture is the arts. that over time gets elevated into a set of beliefs. That's how things change. So what our kids believe is, what part of the arts became the beliefs of today, and it was different for my grandparents and it'll be different for our grandchildren, right? But let's not forget that the arts have incredible influence, and art and culture in the past was shaped by the size of the theater. Okay, cricket was shaped by the size and the capacity of the stadiums, which is by an Eden Gardens match was more exciting than a match which was played in Rajkot, right? But India now has got 500 million people powered by digital devices, smartphones, computers. And I think, they downloaded some 200 million apps in the last 1 year. So, what is the new theater, therefore? And therefore, if you're making policies around this, right, the policies can look either as a spoiler with antediluvian thinking that is slowing down this kind of progress, or it can be looked at as, oh my gosh, I've got a policy that's going to make sure it leverages the power of this 500 million people and the next 300 million apps, and we're going to take this to places where the progress will be mind blowing, right? Like we see in the Far East. And therefore, I think we are in a stage right now where we are constantly playing catch up. I think as a result of both the spread of this, the scale of this, the understanding of this, and I think it's too overwhelming for any single agency, because our agency for content creation in India has always been the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, right? And they have the whole Doordarshan agenda to look after. They have to protect the national policy on news and make sure it doesn't go into foreign hands. They have to make sure that censorship will protect young people from seeing content that should only be seen by adults, and a number of and of course when we uh, proposed it from the CII and FICCI platforms, not more than 20 years ago, privatization of radio, how that should be regulated in terms of spectrum and so on and so forth. But look at the size of what has to happen today. I spoke to you that as a sunrise sector, we are being looked at as a job creator by the Department of Commerce and Industry. And of course, they will also look at what percentage of foreign holdings we should allow in these sensitive areas. And most of the state policies, all of them, if I'm not mistaken, have been born within the Ministry of Information Technology. Whereas those folks in the past were, both in the past and the future, will come out with the IT rules. You've seen all the conversation around the OTT platforms today, where the IT rules are being implemented by the Ministry of Information Broadcasting, because there is access rights, code of ethics, cybersecurity, that cocktail of various things that are obviously uniquely theirs. And I was invited to a panel day before yesterday by the Ministry of Consumer Affairs that wants to create standards to ensure the protection of consumers in terms of what will brands promote, how will it be promoted, on which platform, and through ads, how we'll regulate that. And there's already self-regulation in advertising for many, many years. And then you have TRAI. So I mean, I can go on, but in the interest of time, Sarthak, what I want to say is that there are matters of intellectual property, there are matters of ownership, and therefore policy must find a way to create a more unified framework as these things get broader and wider and multi stakeholders come into play. We need for that to happen. In fact, I'm putting up the second edition of something I call Summit Effects, which is a global CII conference that we started in this sector, and this will be the second year. And in that meeting, we will have at least 5 ministries. And on different days, we will be actually looking at what those ministries are doing with the industry across these different sectors, because that's the matrix that we need to make sure comes into one place. And while growth is all important, what is the mindset of the policymaker? The mindset for them is that they need to put in the guardrails, as I said, make sure there is a fair play, make sure there is a ease of redressal mechanisms. Media is the most powerful entity in the world. And as AVGC content or digital content expands beyond cartoons and animated movies, as I told you earlier, to all forms of storytelling, its influence and authority needs to have a clear articulation. And the stakeholders in this field have the power to make the guilty innocent, and they have the power to make the innocent guilty. And the minds of a billion people are being influenced by our imagery. And there lies the rub.
So, Biren, this was something which was really interesting. I mean, you started with the fact that this entire sector helps make people affluent, and at the same time, it can be used for entertainment. But at the same time, it is also extremely powerful and influential. So, I think you have covered the entire spectrum here.
Thank you.
So I think, Biren, it was really a pleasure to have you here. You gave a detailed overview of the AVGC sector, where the sector is right now, how is it poised to grow, what can be some of the hurdles, and how can we address it. So thanks, Biren, for all this.
Thank you very much. I'm hoping that we will have a greater unification of folks coming together as a result of this podcast and putting their collective weight, whether they're consumers, whether they're producers, whether they're government, and all the very best to you for continuing to look at all things policy.
Yes, thanks, Biren. And given the number of stakeholders that are there, we will try to get all the stakeholders together in one unified framework. Thanks, Biren. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll meet again in one more episode of All Things Policy.
The Takshashila Institution is an independent, non-partisan think tank and a school of public policy. We have education programs lasting 1 semester and 1 year that are tailored specifically for people like you. They are all online and you can take them from anywhere. Admissions are now open for our 12-week graduate certificate program in public policy, defense and foreign affairs, technology policy, and health and life sciences. Visit takshashila.org.in/courses to find out more. If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.
I hope you enjoyed that show. If you aren't following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We'd like to thank the sponsors on the network this week. Thank you so much to Cred, CED, and Global Victoria. Without you guys, this thing would not be possible. So, on the note, Maruk Inayat gives us an overview of the potential Twitter ban in India. On this round is on me. Gauri Devi Dayal was joined by actor-producer Purna Jagannathan to talk about her career in Bollywood, Hollywood, and theatre. She talks about the upcoming season of the show Never Have I Ever. On Cyrus Says, we had legendary musician Usha Uttup. She took us through her journey and shared her experiences as the unconventional musician. In the second installment of the Father's Day special on Akla Station Adulthood, Ayushi has a candid conversation with her father, Siddhartha Amin. On the Global Victoria Tech Talks podcast, we showcase some compelling new tech stories coming out of Melbourne. Whether it's from the buzzing gaming industry or the robust edtech sector, Victoria is increasingly becoming a hub of emerging technology. And we talk to some thought leaders and industry legends about the same. Catch all the action from the World Test Championship on the Edges and Sledges podcast. For our Hindi listeners, we have Khel Niti, which goes live on YouTube every morning. And with that, I hope to see you again next week.
Want to learn something new and have a few minutes to spare? Well, then go for the Traveling Professor's Diary, where I, Siddharth Deshmukh, the Traveling Professor, will help you glean from all the insights that I've gained from wherever I've traveled, learned, taught, and repeated. Join me every Tuesday and Thursday on the IVM Podcast website, app, or wherever you get your podcasts from.